When something falls into the category of just the right amount, we can think about this thing existing in the Goldilocks Zone. This idea, of course, comes from the famous fairy tale where our little trespassing heroine barges into the open door of the bear's home, steals food that's just the right temperature, breaks a chair that's just the right size, and falls into a carb coma on a bed that's just the right softness. A most famous application of the Goldilocks principle is probably in reference to Earth itself. We happen to be just the right distance from our star in order to have liquid water. If we were any closer, it would boil away. If we were any farther away, it would be frozen. We also have a large moon, which stabilizes our spin and controls our tides. And we have our large neighboring planet, namely Jupiter, sucks up most of the space trash that would otherwise be bombarding us with meteors and comets and other things, which would be destroying life continuously. We see the Goldilocks principle applied in medicine, we see it in statistics, economics, and many other areas. Today we're going to see it applied to perhaps the most noble of pursuits, pizza dough. So what are the characteristics that make this pizza dough qualify as being the Goldilocks of pizza doughs? Well, for one thing, it's got good flavor development. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of the really strongly flavored, naturally fermented and sourdough pizza doughs that are out there that sometimes ferment for 3 or 4 days. But also, if you just whip it up super quick and you don't get any flavor development, it's just a little bit underwhelming. Second, it's got a nice chew to it. It's not too tender, it's also not too tough, and it ends up with a really nice crisp crust on the bottom. And finally, it's got a nice amount of rise to it. It doesn't puff up as much as a margarita pizza, as a Neapolitan style pizza would, but it also just doesn't remain flat and cracker-like like a tavern or bar style pizza would. Now obviously, these characteristics are a little bit subjective, and they do depend somewhat upon your goal. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this pizza dough for making a Detroit style or another deep dish style of pizza, but it really is surprisingly versatile. When I first started making the dough a couple years ago, I actually didn't have my outdoor oven yet, which is my favorite way to cook it now. That time, all I had was the home oven. I've baked pizzas in trays in the oven. I baked them directly on the pizza stone. I baked them in a pizza steel, and they come out great every time. And across all those situations and cooking methods and toppings and different kinds of salsas and cheeses and all the different varieties of pizza that I've made on it, the comment that most people make in the end is how much that they like the crust. And I think that's why it actually qualifies as being a Goldilocks of pizza doughs. All right, let's crack into the recipe now, and I'm going to break some of these things down for us. Okay, first things first, we need to talk about flour. For this recipe, if you can access it, I highly recommend that you get the Italian cheapo 00 flour. It's available in the specialty section of most supermarkets and is quite readily available online, and it's one of the real keys to getting this Goldilocks of pizza dough. It's been used for generations by the Italians for making pizza and pasta. It comes from a variety of wheat called soft wheat and ends up with a target protein percentage of between 10 to 11%. Now that's around the same range that you'd find in a normal all-purpose or plain flour, but it's more finely milled and it ends up having a really silky smooth texture, and there's just some magic to it that I can't quite explain, but it's absolutely the one that you want if you can access it. If you want to know more about this flour and lots of other varieties of flour, I highly recommend that you check out Ethan Chabowski's Deep Dive into Flour. It's a fantastic video with tons of information and helps explain a lot of the reasons why you would choose one flour over another flour. I'll link to it in the description down below. If you can access the imported stuff, a lot of local producers around the world make their own pizza flours that follow the same principles as the Tipo 00. We have one here in New Zealand that works great, and if I run out of the imported stuff, I'll happily use that, and it's probably 95% as good as the Italian stuff. If you can't access either one of those, feel free to use all-purpose or plain flour, somewhere with that 10 to 11% of protein, and it's going to end up working fine as well too. But if you can, try to get the Tipo 00.
Okay, so we've already covered the flour here, and this is just good plain old water at room temperature, and this is extra virgin olive oil, or any type of oil you have is fine. All the amounts in a full written recipe are down below, so you don't really need to bother about paying attention. You can just see what's going on and then check the description below if you actually want to make it. I'm putting everything in the bowl of my stand mixer because I have one. If you don't have one, you can do it by hand, no problem, but I have it, so I intend to use it. So this cool tool is called a Danish dough whisk. It's really great for mixing dough together. As you can see, it's quite kind of stiff and there's big holes in it. It's quite different than another whisk, which is meant for aeration. This is meant for mixing stiff ingredients, not aerating. So the whole point here really is just to get the liquids to mix into the dough, and you want no dry spots left in the bottom. As you can see, I'm going to pull up and you'll see it's a nice clean bottom with no dry bits. Yeah, so that's good. Just a shaggy mess really. And we're going to clean that off, and then we're going to set that aside for a second, and we're going to go ahead and mix together our other dry ingredients. So in this case, I'm just using instant yeast. That's salt, sugar, and yeast. So yeah, that's instant yeast, but if you have active dry yeast or you have fresh yeast, you can use any ones that you want. You just have to find the amounts to convert. I'm sure there's guides for that online. I somehow misplaced my tiny whisk. I know Babish would be pretty upset with me, but a little metal spoon. Well, a little wooden spoon would work too. Any kind of spoon you want, really. Probably don't even need to mix it up, but I'm pedantic and that's what I do.
So why do we let the dough rest before we carry on? Lots of bread recipes out there will have you go straight onto the kneading after you've added the water and the other ingredients. Well, if we let it sit for a little bit, we're actually going to have a couple things occur which are going to work to our favor. First of all, we're going to allow all the water that we added to the flour absorb in so that the dough becomes consistently hydrated. Also, the moment that you add water to flour, the proteins glutenin and gliadin begin to form bonds with each other and develop into gluten, which is what provides the structure for the dough. And most important for the purposes of this recipe, the dough is going to undergo a process called autolysis. This is a reaction in which enzymes in the flour begin the process of digesting the proteins and starches that are naturally present. As the proteins in the flour degrade, the dough becomes more extensible and much easier to stretch. So I found that if I don't give the dough an autolysis period and move straight onto the kneading, it always remains a bit too elastic and hard to stretch out. And if I give it too much, I found that it becomes too stretchy and won't bounce back. You want a nice balance between elasticity and plasticity, and 20 minutes seems to be the Goldilocks zone for that.
Okay, so our dough has had its little 20-minute nap and it's ready for more action. It's going to look pretty much the same as before. The dry ingredients are going to be mixed in now. Some recipes will have you mix everything together before the autolysis period. I heard once that it can't be a true autolysis if you have anything other than water and flour in there. I don't really know about that, but I do know that the salt can affect the development of gluten and yeast development, and I also don't want my yeast activating yet anyway, because this is a long ferment and I don't want it overproving while it sits in the fridge overnight. So while this is mixing, we're gonna just quickly go through the properties of all the ingredients. Flour we've already talked about. Water obviously hydrates the dough and provides the moisture for it to build it. The olive oil adds some flavor, obviously, but it's also going to add some richness to the dough and a tenderness, because fat tenderizes dough. The sugar adds a little bit of flavor. It also adds some extra browning. It's going to make it brown up a little bit nicer. The salt will add a lot of flavor, and the yeast obviously is what converts the starches into CO2 and alcohol, and it's the CO2 bubbles which give the dough rise. So that's why we end up putting all those. Lots of pizza dough recipes don't have sugar or oil in them, but mine does, and I find that to be part of what makes it have that nice tender bite. So I'm just checking to see how it is so far. It's still really gummy. You can see it hasn't developed much. That's fine. We really don't want to overwork the dough at this point or at any point. Gentle handling of the dough is something that's really I find to be key. You don't need to do too much with pizza. You just need to basically get it just to the point where you can spread it out, and you don't want to overwork it because it'll make it go tough. So we really want to mix it for about 3 to 5 minutes, just depending upon the speed of the mixer. And And with the magic of editing, we are pretty much done with this mix. We're going to just check it now and see. I think it's ready. Yeah, I think it's done. It doesn't come away from the sides of the bowl. That's fine. Again, this is a simple one to do by hand. I just use the mixer really because it's cleaner and because I have it and I have to justify having an expensive machine, right? So we're going to get all the dough off the sides of the dough hook. And you can see that it's still a bit sticky on my fingers, but it's much stretchier than it was before. That's perfect. That's just how we want it. So we're going to put a little blanket over it and give it another nice nap. It's going to be a 30 minutes nap this time. And once again, through the magic of editing, we are back. So I'm going to wet my fingers a little bit here. It makes it much easier when you're dealing with sticky doughs. And we're going to give it a stretch and fold. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to lift up from the bottom of the bowl and fold it over itself about 4 or 5 times, basically rotating in a circle. You can see the nice stretchiness of it. It's much stretchier than it was half an hour ago. And this is going to help develop the gluten a little bit more. It's going to kind of redistribute all the ingredients as well too. I almost never make any kind of bread without doing a stretch and fold now. It's just become part of my process. And that's pretty much it. Fold it over on itself a few times and you're done. And we're going to put the lid back on it. Once I finish faffing around, we'll put the lid on it and we're going to give it another 30-minute rest. But this time it's going to be inside the fridge because I want to get that yeast cooling down, to get all the ingredients cooling down. I don't want it overproofing in the fridge, as I said before. Cool. So now we are ready to shape. So it's had an hour in total proof, half an hour on the bench and half an hour in the fridge. And you can see it's really nice and stretchy now and beautiful. Nice, long, developed gluten strands. So we're going to start portioning it after the wet hands, of course. My favorite tool for portioning is using scissors. I find it a little bit easier than having to put all the dough out onto the work surface. And I'm getting everything wet first. And here are the aforementioned scissors. And it just makes it a little bit easier, really, instead of sticking it out. And I clean them really well first before I use them, and then I clean them when I'm done. And these are kitchen shears. I use them just for cooking. So once we get them portioned out, I think these are about 380 to 400 gram balls each, just depending on the amount of water. I use different amounts of water for the different doughs that I have. It's almost exactly the same, but maybe a 2 or 3% difference in the water based on the flour I'm using. So now we're going to do some shaping. So basically I'm kind of doing almost the reverse of the stretch and fold. I'm pulling the sides out and I'm folding it underneath and pushing it up from the bottom. So it's kind of hard to show. We're going to see a different angle of it in a second, which may help. But you're stretching out, folding up underneath, and the idea is you're trying to build tension on the outside of the dough. And that means when you roll it out, it's going to help hold its shape. So there we go. Beautiful. I'm going to look at an alternate angle on the second one, I think. Or is it the same angle again? Yeah, here we go. So I'm kind of using the tips of my fingers to push it up under itself, and I'm pulling them out. This is why you need to wet your fingers first so that they don't stick to the dough. And you don't need to do it too many times. I'm probably doing it a bit more than needed just to show it, but you can see how it's getting really smooth on the outside, and that looks really nice. Yeah, and then we're going to pinch the seams from the bottom. It takes a little bit of getting used to, guys, but it doesn't take that long. You can also roll them on the bench top, or there's a keyhole method. Just search on YouTube and there's heaps of ways of doing different doughs if the way I'm doing it doesn't work. So we're going to put the lid back in there and we're going to pop them in the fridge, and they are ready to go to have a nice little 8 to 12 hour nap before they get turned into pizza dough. Easy peasy.
So now we're going to let the dough hang out in the fridge for between 8 to 12 hours. Generally on pizza day, I'll make the dough first thing in the morning, and then I'll just let it hang out until I bake in the evening. So I've experimented with letting the dough hang out in the fridge overnight all the way up to 3 days, and I have to say, I just don't really like it as much. I find that both the flavor and the texture are adversely affected. I've also been to several pizza places to make their own sourdough or naturally fermented crust, and I've never been a big fan. I absolutely love sourdough and bread, but I find for pizza dough, the chewiness and the strong flavor of a sourdough crust end up just competing with the other flavors of the sauce and the cheese and the toppings, and I think it's all about balance. Now, I won't immediately write off every long fermented pizza dough out there because I'm sure some of them can be fantastic. But for this particular dough, that 8 to 12 hours is really what's going to give you that Goldilocks zone. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you're wondering why you're not seeing me turn it into an actual pizza, it's because I already have a video on that which you can go and watch right now. I really wanted to focus very specifically on just the dough itself here, and in that other video I'm going to show you how to stretch the dough out, top it, and then bake it in the wood fire oven that I made. So please go check that out. Check out my other videos, and if you really enjoyed it, you can share it with someone else and tell them that you enjoyed it. You can like, subscribe, do all the things, but really just have a great day. Thanks very much, guys.